In about 2 seconds. Here we go.
We're live. It popped up on mine, so we're live now.
Okay.
We're just gonna wait a few seconds. People are coming on, try to let people get on, and then we'll jump right into it. So good evening, everyone that is coming on with us on Facebook Live. We are just letting a few people join. We will be starting momentarily. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our first in a three-part series on gun reform. My name is Tracy Rainey, and I have the privilege of serving as the second vice president of the Metropolitan Dallas Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, under the leadership of our chapter president, Tanya Muruguri. We are elated to have the opportunity to partner with the City of Dallas for this evening's town hall event. The Metropolitan Dallas Alumni Chapter services the communities of the Greater Dallas Metroplex. And today, we would like to shed some light on an issue that is plaguing our communities. That is gun violence. But more importantly, what can be done to heal our communities in gun reform? Over the past few years, gun violence has stretched our city's resources and is leaving our communities feeling desolate, alone, and hopeless. Dallas Magazine published an article last year with a 5-year review of gun violence in the city, and the results showed that Dallas averaged at least one shooting per day. The data analysis also showed a disproportionate impact of gun violence on the city's Black community, which makes up approximately 24% of Dallas's population, yet we suffer 64% of the city's gun violence. About 55% of the total victims are Black men, leaving our Black women to pick up the pieces. This evening, we've invited panelists from varying areas of our local and state government to weigh in on this issue and offer solutions for change. Thank you again for tuning in to this conversation. And now, Michelle Montgomery, co-chair of our Social Action Committee, will introduce our moderator for the evening.
I am pleased to introduce our moderator for the evening, Jade Burrows. Lady Jade, affectionately known as Radio Sweetheart, is a national syndicated radio co-host on Dee Dee and the Morning Show on K104 FM. Jade is absolutely no stranger to the DFW community. She's a philanthropist in her own right and founded the nonprofit organization Project 16, based right here in Dallas, Texas. Their mission is to equip and inspire youth ages 10 to 16 to realize the broad spectrum of educational paths and career options available to them beyond what they may see in their immediate surroundings. Tonight, we'll be discussing gun reform and gun violence prevention. So who better to serve as our moderator than Lady Jade, who has her license to carry, so she can certainly relate to the subject matter that we'll be discussing. I might also add that she too is a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Another fun fact about Jade is she wants everyone to know she's probably one of Beyonce's biggest fans. So Lady Jade, I'll let you take it from there.
Well, yes, I am part of the Beehive now that you've mentioned it. No, I really am excited to be here today, and especially because we're going to be discussing such an important topic. As Tracy was sharing those numbers, you guys, that is staggering to know that we averaged one shooting a day last year. And I'm born and raised in Dallas, Texas. So it's all about improving our city. And I think the more information and knowledge that we gain, the better that we can serve, right? So I'm going to jump right into introducing our panel. We have some really great questions. We want this to be as interactive as possible. So feel free, if you have any questions, to go ahead and put them in the chat. We will try our best to get to them. If we don't, it's because we ran out of time, because we definitely are limited today. But today is just all about we're going to have a family discussion. This is how I look at this. It's like a family discussion. So first up for our panelists, we have Ms. Tina Schultz, who is the Deputy Chief of Violent Crimes Response Team for the Dallas Police Department. So thank you so much for being here today. We definitely appreciate you.
My pleasure.
Our panel is Tanya McClary, the Director, Office of Community Oversight for the City of Dallas. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for being here, taking your time. We also have Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson for the 30th Congressional District of Texas. And I've actually moderated a couple of panels that she's been on. So you're a busy woman, Ms. Johnson. Thank you for being here tonight. Also, Mark Veazey, who is a congressman for the 33rd Congressional District of Texas. Thank you, Congressman Veazey, for being here this evening. We appreciate you. And also we have Ms. Jasmine Crockett, State Representative-elect, District 100. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna jump right into the questions. Again, I may direct the question at someone, but please, you guys, if you have something that you'd also like to share on that particular question, let's just jump right on in. So I'm gonna start with Deputy Chief Schultz. You're currently over the Violent Crime Response Team for the City of Dallas Police Department, and your department is obviously committed to reducing crime. So let's kick this off by discussing the role that guns play in violent crimes in Dallas County, and what role that your department can assist in reducing those violent crimes.
Good evening, and thank you guys for having me. Just to kind of give you guys a snapshot, we'll just look at the month of September and what gun violence looks like. So in the month of December, we had about 488 aggravated assault non-family violence. And in that, there were 385 guns, whether they displayed or discharged. And the number that was discharged was 263. So it equates to about 75% of our aggravated assaults have some sort of gun nexus to it. So if you just take that, and that's just a snapshot for the month of December or month of September, and we go back, it's kind of an alarming number that it seems like anytime something happens with any kind of assault, a gun is involved. And so what my team likes to look at is we do try to focus in on the offenses and the offenders that have some kind of gun nexus. And in that, we try to identify that and do the best that we can on removing those guns. There's obviously that enforcement component. That's an important component, but there's also a huge community awareness component in regards to, we have programs like iWatch and texting information, because a lot of times people don't want to call the police and say, hey, John down the street has a gun and stuff like that. And so we have ways to pass in information to where you can be anonymous. But that's the biggest thing, is there's a focus part, which is the focus of where these gun offenses are happening. But then there's the balance approach to where we incorporate some enforcement component, but also the community awareness. And then there's that fairness component. How do we enforce that law when it comes to guns and such? And so we try to take, that trifold approach to make sure that it is a fair approach, and we make sure that we keep the community safe in regards to pulling those guns off the street, but not while taking on someone's right to own a gun.
So you mentioned, I do want to piggyback on something you said. You mentioned that there's a texting information and a way for people to be anonymous. I think that's one of the issues what is that information? If somebody's watching today and maybe they do want to be anonymous, or they do want to text in some information of something that they saw, maybe they saw someone with a gun, what is that information?
So there is, I'm not computer savvy and stuff like that, but there's an app that you can download that's Dallas iWatch, and you can download to your phone. And then if there's information that you want to pass on to the police department, you can get in there and you can text that information. It wouldn't have to be immediately when you're there, but that's there. And pretty much nowadays, everybody has some sort of smartphone. The app itself is free, and it's something that you can put on your phone at any time. And like I said, you can text the information and you remain anonymous.
All right, Dallas iWatch is the name of that app, correct?
Yes.
All
I
right.
may confirm that too, but yeah, I believe that is.
Okay. If it changes, just tell us later. We'll be on.
I'm gonna find on my phone real quick.
Okay, no worries. Congresswoman Johnson, again, thank you so much for being here and taking your time this evening. You're currently serving in our 14th term in Congress. Number one, congratulations on that, and you do a fabulous job. Given your expertise in congressional law and your background in psychiatric nursing, what role do you think mental illness plays in gun violence, especially in the African-American community? And how does the Helping Families in Mental Health Crisis Act address this issue?
Well, thank you very much. And let me thank Delta Sigma Theta for sponsoring this. I am just delighted. I work with some very, very skilled women every day that are Deltas. I just happen to be an AK, but we're sisters in spirit.
Amen.
My daughter-in-law is a Delta, who is the mother of my grandchildren. Let me say that mental health has a great deal of influence on gun violence. And I'm pleased to say that Dallas recently has taken on some leadership in addressing this issue. I'm very proud of what the police department is doing. They're working with both the fire department as well as the Parkland, and we're getting ready to open a mental health facility, and with all the other facilities that are present. I just had a visit last weekend with Officer Rucker, who was born and reared here and got his bachelor's and master's in area colleges. And he's been honored for all of the attention he's given this issue. Let me just say that most people that deal with guns sometimes have mental and emotional problems anyway.
Sure.
And so, having been the chief psychiatric nurse at the VA hospital, I was very aware of many of the mental health struggles, especially minorities have dealt with, that have never had an outlet for treatment. So when it comes to discussing the intersection of mental health and gun violence, I support a twofold approach of thoughtfulness as well as action. It is incumbent upon us as a community leaders to ensure that those among us who are struggling with challenges of life can get mental health resources that they need. They have not really been available. As a matter of fact, we've always kind of considered mental health as taboo, but that is really not the case. For example, in 2017, 6 in 10 gun deaths in the United States were suicides. So the average firearm suicide rate has significantly increased from 17.1% from 2005 to 2015. So they were just beginning to do some of the research. One of the reasons that I tried to pass this bill a number of years and didn't really get it passed until a Republican practicing psychologist read about my legislation and said, let's do this. And so we did get it passed. However, we did not get one of the key factors included, and that is to make mental health a part of the Medicaid system. Because we know that people with mental illnesses will not get over them in 10 days or a short period of time. It takes a period of time. And so they need more financial support to do that for sometimes continuing on, maybe even close to a lifetime. But it does mean that we have to make care available to people that need it. For example, suicide has just gone up tremendously, and it affects a lot of the minority community. And we had a suicide hotline, but it was like a 9-digit number. I have worked for 3 years and finally got it passed that we have a 3-digit number for people suffering with mental illness. Can you just think, somebody who is frustrated and thinking about suicide and can remember a 9 or 10-digit number, but we all can remember 911. So I think we can all remember 988, which is now it's going to be. And so those are the kinds of things that I've tried to help with, because just talking about gun violence and mental illness, and they really are connected, is not going to do anything to change it. We've got to do some fundamental things. It's been neglected for so many years. And so just recently, I introduced other federal legislation along with my colleague, Congressman Tony Cardenas, that is called Strengthening Mental Health Supports for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color Communities, because we deal with all of these problems that lead into emotional and mental health. That includes drug problems. It includes family instability. It's a wide range of influences. Yes. And so we can talk about cutting crime, but until we deal with the issues that come right along with crime, and the proliferations of guns that are available, especially in Texas, we're not going to get very far. So these support type systems will help us to reach where we're trying to go. For example, we do need national legislation. We can have good legislation at state level. Texas has probably one of the most loosely guarded gun laws in the nation, which I think sometimes is too loose. But there are states like Illinois that has restricted gun laws, but their gun violence is up because they can drive right over to the line where Indiana's state line and get all the guns they want. So just background checks, all of that's going to help, because in background, when people are mentally, emotionally disturbed, it usually can be detected. There's resistance from the gun people that are selling them for that. Right. And so that we have not taken on the right responsibility to address these issues, and we've allowed it to get out of hand over a number of years. It is going to take all of us working together to influence local, state, and federal government to address the issue.
Yes, and I can't thank you enough. Especially in the African American community, you know, we have not quite normalized that conversation of mental health, but we are beginning to, and we are moving in the right direction. Like you said, it is kind of taboo in a sense. So I appreciate you pushing that forward. And that number that you mentioned earlier, that was a really great point about not being able to look. I can't even remember somebody's number in my family. So when you're in a distress situation, you're definitely not going to be able to. So the number that you gave out earlier, it was 988, correct? So,
yes.
Okay, 988, 988. Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. And there's a couple of more questions I have for you later on as well.
Okay.
Again,
sure, I'll be here throughout.
Thank you so much. I do have a question for you, Congressman Beasy. We heard the numbers earlier that related to domestic violence and guns being involved, obviously. So as Deputy Whip for the Gun Violence Prevention Task Force, can you tell us what legislation is in place to protect women from domestic violence attacks, especially those that are involving guns and unfortunately losing their lives because of gun violence?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Lady Jade. And just let me say, you know, also in addition to mental health being taboo, I think talking about domestic violence in our community has been taboo.
Absolutely.
People don't want to talk about it. You know, people don't want to talk about it, especially when it involves someone that may be a community leader or someone that's in the public spotlight. Or, you know, we saw the Dallas Cowboy a few years ago that was picked up that threw his partner on a stack full of AK-47s and AR-15s on his couch because he had a temper problem. And, you know, you couple that domestic violence with people that would do something like that. And, you know, we need to work to get these people to admit that they have problems and get them into treatment.
Sure.
So they can, you know, try to live productive lives and play a part in their families' lives. And And I'm glad that we're talking about this, because I think that we need to. And because when you mix domestic violence, especially with guns, oftentimes it's tragic enough even without it. When you see what these families go through. But when you add a gun or you add a firearm into the mix, it's even a worse situation. And so last year in the House, we finally passed 3 pieces of legislation that dealt with this common sense, bipartisan action to help deal with gun violence. And I want people to remember that we have about 40,000 people that lose their lives every year, including 47 children and teenagers every day. That's every single day. And so we passed a piece of legislation that 90% of the public, Lady Jade, 90% of the public backs. But we were having trouble for years getting these pieces of legislation out until we took over the majority in the House. And so the first bill that we passed back in February 2019, and Eddie and myself and Colin Aldred voted for all of these pieces of legislation. It expanded background checks to make them universal, including all gun sales, because one of the ways that people were getting around getting background sales is that they would go and buy a gun from an individual. We saw that in Midland, Texas, with the shooter that was there. That you go and buy a gun from an individual, and you don't have to pass any sort of background check. That's dangerous, especially when we talk about people that may have a domestic violence issue. And so we passed that bill, and there was an amendment in there to protect citizens from intimate partner violence and domestic abusers. And so that was the first piece of legislation that we passed. We also passed HR 1112, which was introduced by our whip, Jim Clyburn, who represents Charleston, South Carolina. And you probably remember the tragedy that happened in Charleston at the AME church there, where the white supremacists walked in and killed several African-American parishioners that were at prayer service. And that bill was so important because basically, if the FBI background check didn't come back in 3 days, they had to give you the gun. And that was how that sicko got the gun that he did, and was able to commit the act of violence against African-American churchgoers like that, was because the legislation didn't come back. And so we passed the bill to close that. And also, when we passed the bill to close that, we worked very closely with several organizations, and we wanted to be sure that a report would be submitted to Congress that would report on the safety of victims of domestic violence, domestic abuse, dating partner violence, sexual assault, stalking, and other amendments that we wanted to put in there and make it part of the background check to make sure, again, that people that may have committed some sort of domestic violence, that they cannot be able to buy a gun and be able to get one through this loophole. And so those were just a few of the things that we did. And we also passed the Violence Against Women Act as well. And that also has language in there lots of language in there that protects partners and women from domestic abusers that may be in their life. So we've done a lot of work. The problem is that we don't have a lot of help in the Senate. So we pass these bills, with the exception of violence against women. We pass these bills and they go to the Senate and they sit nowhere. And it's really a tragedy when you think about it. When you think about these mostly men that are committing these acts of violence using firearms, and like you, I'm also a firearm owner myself. So I'm not against people that are mentally sound and have been trained in owning a firearm. I love to go to the range and use my firearm. Sure. But the fact of the matter is that when people have a serious mental illness and a sickness to where they can't control their tempers and they're abusing their domestic partners, they shouldn't get guns. And one of the issues that we have, even despite what I mentioned a second ago, 90% of the population supporting these laws, they go to the Senate and they go there and they die. And it's just it's unfortunate, because I talk to so many people that are Democrats, Republicans, independents, when I'm in downtown Dallas and downtown Fort Worth, where I live, and they all are very supportive of these laws. And so seeing them just languish over in the Senate, I think is bad. And if we're fortunate enough to be in a situation, Eddie and I, when we go back to Congress in 2021, we need to make sure that if we have a Democratic Senate and a Democratic White House, that these are some of the first pieces of legislation that go to the president's desk and get signed into law.
Okay. Well, thank you for what you do. And I do have a question in just a second for Ms. McClary and also for State Representative Crockett. But you mentioned something, we're talking about mental health screenings and background checks. I guess my question would be, and I don't know if this is to you or anybody on the panel, where do you go get mental health screenings? Most people that have mental health issues have never been screened, have never been diagnosed. So that would never show up on a background check, or am I mistaken? I don't think I've ever had one that I know of.
In certain circumstances, they would show up in background checks. There are people that have been committed. There are people that have certainly been arrested because they have domestic abuse charges that have been filed against them, or they've been even convicted of domestic abuse charges. And all of those things would show up on a computer. There are, when you think about the number of Americans that have a mental illness, of course, not everyone's mental illness is going to show up there, and some of those mental illnesses are not serious mental illnesses, right? There are only some that only a certain percentage that would lead people to hurt someone physically, like in a domestic violence situation, or to go shoot up a club or misuse a gun in whatever way that they choose.
Right.
But there are people that there is a way for these stores and for these gun sellers to be able to check people's mental health background under certain circumstances, and certainly if they have some domestic violence history, that can instantly be found out.
I guess I was meaning more so along the lines of, how many people do we know that have anger issues, that lack coping strategies, which are normally people that snap? If you have just an anger issue, you don't necessarily go get screened for it. So it would not show up on that background check, which to me goes even further back to say, is it something that in schools that everybody at a certain point in time is getting screened with? Look, we'll be here all night if I change the subject, but that's what I meant, is like, so many people seem to be able to still make these purchases of guns, even legally, because they don't have a background right now, and unfortunately there's, especially towards the domestic violence towards women, somebody unfortunately should not have to pass for that to be able to show up. You know what I mean? But we appreciate what you and Congresswoman Johnson are doing, pushing these bills. And you're right, it is absolutely unfortunate that they just sit in the Senate. So besides you guys pushing it forward, we're gonna be in prayer that those, go to the level.
Let me just make a quick comment. I know we're on a schedule, but let me say that I don't know that we can point a finger anywhere to put the total blame of why we're not where we need to be. We cannot blame the police department. We could not blame almost any institution, except that, generally speaking, society has neglected to give attention to this area. We are now realizing how important it is. And so we're trying now to address it. I have a bill that I just talked about, HR 1841, where it provides for block grants for local governments to be able to instill and educate and get people in for checks. We blame the police on everything that happens, but we don't equip them with the skills to deal with mental illness, which is a great deal of what they deal with. And I think you might have remembered that Chief Brown, when he was here, said it was just too much put on the responsibilities for the police department. They can't be psychiatrists. They're not equipped to be psychiatrists, but because that's a lot of what they deal with is mental problems.
That's a very good point. I say police officers and teachers are the most underappreciated careers. It's just amazing to me. Yes, you're right. The amount of responsibility you are to be responsible, but we do have higher expectations than probably what they've been trained for. So that's a very good point. I have a question for Mrs. McClary. As director of the Police Oversight Board, what is your vision for the city of Dallas when thinking about building trust really between African Americans and the police department? And think about it, considering all the racial inequities with police encounters. Congressman Veazey was just mentioning needing treatment and so on and so forth, and domestic violence. Sometimes we don't want to call the police because we want them to get help, but we don't want it to escalate into anything. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you to the Metropolitan Dallas Alumni Chapter. I'm also a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta. Ooh, throw it on out there. And so I'm so proud of my sorors because that's what we do. We do public service. And so it's not surprising to me that it would be the Deltas that would bring this issue to the community. And I always like to tell people that I feel like I'm a 30-year dream in the making. The citizens in Dallas have been asking for oversight for 30 plus years. And so it's a big mantle to carry to be the first police monitor for the city of Dallas, but I'm excited and up to the challenge. One of the things that is going to be important, Lady Jade, is just what you said. How is this office going to help build the trust between the community and the police department? And that is one of the goals of oversight, is to be a gap between both departments. And so one of the things that I want to ensure the public is that our job of oversight is to be in every aspect of the police department. So Chief Hall and I and whoever the new police chief will be spend a lot of time together, as well as I spend a lot of time with internal affairs, which is the department within a police department that looks at the issues that are going on. So I always like to tell people we're kind of like the civilian version of an internal affairs. We're monitoring it from the outside. So we are there at every scene of shootings. You will see our car out there. You will see me or a member of the staff. So whether that call comes to me at 3 a.m. or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we are out there to see how evidence is being collected, to see how people are potentially being interviewed, to see what is going on, so that you know that there is a civilian entity with your interest in mind out there from the beginning of things like shootings and critical incidents. We are also going to be partnering with the police department on several programs going forward. And so one of the things that I really appreciate about Chief Hall is that she makes sure that our office is involved in all aspects of the police department. So when they're doing things like trying to develop an early warning system, my office is a part of that team, a part of that task force, hearing the pitches from the various vendors, hearing the goals of the police department, and asking questions about how is this going to help keep this community of Dallas safe? What about this? What about that? The same thing in terms of culture. They're in the process of doing a cultural assessment. Our office is right there and saying, when you measure culture, how are you getting the community's input in that? How are you hearing what the community's concerns are about the culture of this department? And so my vision is for us to work very closely with the department, but to also work very closely with the community to bridge those gaps. And so the other thing is also accountability. So you all can file complaints. You don't now have to just send them to the Dallas Police Department. You can file a complaint with my office, and we will make sure that those complaints, we meet weekly. So my office, as well as the police department, are the people that decide what happens to complaints that come in from you all. So there's no longer just the police presence at the table. There's also a community presence that is talking about the complaints that are coming in, looking at the complexities of them, and deciding how they should go forward. And we're going to be doing things like Know Your Rights programs. And I'm hoping that the police department will be able to join us so that you can hear our perspective about how you all need to be safe, but also hearing the police perspective. So we will be doing several things together as Office of Community Police Oversight and a police department to ensure that you all know as a community that we are right there with you, that whenever possible, your voice is in the room through my office or through this board. And so my vision is that the more our office gets out into the community, the more people know that our office exists, the more that you know that you can access us and ask us to be your voice, that we can use the power that we've been given in the city, which the average civilian does not have, that we will leverage that power to make sure that we are bringing your ideas and your concerns forward and to helping make the Dallas Police Department the best it can be. I know there's been a lot of talk about defunding the police. I think we all know that the Dallas Police Department is not going anywhere anytime soon. And so until or if that ever happens, oversight is here to ensure that the community of Dallas feels that the police department is addressing the things that it needs in order to keep the community safe.
Well, that's awesome. Mentioning the oversight board, and you mentioned filing complaints. What is the process? How, if there's somebody's out there that's a note taker like me, I've been writing everything down that you guys are saying. How do people file complaints, and where do they go to find out more about the Know Your Rights programs that you guys are going to be holding?
So the Know Your Rights program is very new. So when it, you can come to our websites. There's a website for the Office of Community Police Oversight, which I direct, as well as the Community Police Oversight Board. You can file complaints in many ways. We try to make it easy. You can call us. So we don't want to discriminate against people that don't have the internet. Most people have a phone, even if it's a burner phone, a prepaid phone. Most people have a phone, so you can call us. We will take your complaint over the phone. You can also go to either website, the boards or the offices, and file a complaint online. You can mail us a complaint. So we want to make sure that and when City Hall opens back up, you can walk into the office and file a complaint. So we want to make sure that we are making this system as accessible as possible. We are also working on a new project where we're hoping that we are going to be able to provide complaint forms to many of the community areas in the city. So when the libraries open back up, you'll be able to fill out a complaint form at the library. We're going to be partnering with various community centers, so then when they open back up, those staff will be trained so that you can come to your local community center and fill out a complaint. So once we hopefully get through COVID and what our new world is going to look like, we're going to be making sure that not only can you come to City Hall, to this office or to a police district, but that in many places around the city that people interact with, that we are going to be able to have you be able to fill out complaints there as well. But currently, Lady J, call, text, email, write, and we will get your complaint.
No excuses. So many ways to get your voice heard. That's right. You definitely have thought of every facet, every possible way for somebody to be able to express themselves. So we appreciate that. State Representative Crockett, thank you for being here. So as a freshman lawmaker representative, House District 100, your goal has always been to protect the civil liberties of those underrepresented communities, which that's near and dear to my heart. So let's talk about neighborhood watch programs. Some people take them serious, some people don't. What do you feel about their effectiveness and how they can actually help to reduce gun violence, if you believe they can?
So first of all, I want to say thank you to MDA, my wonderful sorors. You got another Delta right here.
Look, I'm gonna keep going, Congresswoman Johnson like this, okay?
No, so I can't really say that I'm a big fan of what we would consider to be the traditional neighborhood watch. When we think about it, what happened to Trayvon Martin? That was neighborhood watch. When we think about it, we have this bootleg situation with Ahmaud Arbery, neighborhood watch, right? Like, we gonna do a citizen's arrest. So I think people can kind of get out of hand. That does not mean that I don't believe that there's a role that we can play as good neighbors. And I believe that there's a role that we should play. When I think about growing up, I used to spend so much time at my grandma's house. My grandma had me and all my cousins, and everyone on the block knew exactly who we were. They knew who we belonged to. They knew our ages. They knew when we were supposed to be there and when we weren't supposed to be there. And so it was like a community, it was a real community feel, a real village feel. Mm-hmm. And so if we get back to that, I think that we can reduce gun violence. I think we can reduce it on so many different levels. By that, what do I mean? So for instance, actually in the middle of my heated campaign where I'm supposed to be knocking doors, I get a call from a woman. It's a grandmother, and she actually belongs to Texas Organizing Project. And so TOP was one of those groups that endorsed me. That's how I met her. It just so happens that I represented her grandson on a criminal case. And she never knew that, right? So like it all kind of came full circle. Her grandson had mental health issues and he was in the middle of an episode. She was scared to death to call the police. She didn't know who else to call. And so she called me almost to be a buffer, because she knew that he should respond well to me and she knew that I knew him, but she also knew that I could speak to law enforcement and really explain kind of what was going on and hopefully kind of keep things even keel. So even though at the time I was a candidate and I don't have official training as a social worker, I was called in. But I think that that's a key role that so many of our good neighbors could play. Because when you live in these communities, you've lived there for so long, usually you should know, or usually you do know, oh, that's Johnny. He won't hurt anybody, but he does have an issue. So maybe I should be the one to kind of help out. I think that that's something that we could do. I also think, and that's from the mental health standpoint, when we look at what happened to a Tatiana Jefferson, right? It was a neighbor who saw something that was out of sorts. It was completely out of the norm. And so he called 911. And sadly enough, Tay lost her life. And so I think that there's a role that we could play even for doing wellness checks. It's already been said that law enforcement has a lot that's on them. They're not just police officers. They're doing so much more. And I think that, it's so funny because we're obviously in election cycle. So the defund movement has been front and center. There's one side that's saying, defund, they're going to take away your police. And there's another side that's saying, no, that's not what we're doing. And so, when we look at the protest over the summer, we saw these George Floyd protests. They brought about attention.
Sure.
When you say something like defund the police, it brings about attention. People are like, wait a minute now, does that mean 911 is going away? Like people get real nervous. But the phrasing of defund the police is to do just that. It is to shock the conscience and make people talk, right? If you just said, oh, we want to reimagine policing, it's just not as provocative. And so people start talking, but the defund movement is really one that really is going to assist not only the community, but to assist law enforcement, because law enforcement shouldn't be necessarily taking mental health calls, right? They should be backup for somebody else. So it's about making sure that the people that should be on those calls, that we're making sure that there's resources so that you guys can get that help, right? So that they can be the ones that go out for those calls. There was another thing that you brought up that was so interesting and is near and dear to my heart. And it's just the whole mental health struggle in general. Sure. And so I was on the MetroCare board and I had to resign to run for this position. MetroCare is the largest provider of indigent mental health services in North Texas, unless we're talking about the jail, right? Which the jail is not the proper provider, right? So outside of the jail, they are the largest.
Right.
And so when you talk about, well, how do people get screened and where do they go and that kind of stuff? So MetroCare is one of those places that we've got centers all over. And so that's where people go in. But also as people are being arrested for criminal trespass, I know Judge Creuzot has talked a lot about, well, we shouldn't be incarcerating people because they're mentally ill and that kind of stuff. But it's like, what do we do when we, see somebody out there and they won't leave the Walmart? And so as a defense attorney, we usually have to say, hey, I see something. I'm not a doctor, so I don't make a determination. But if I see something, I literally have to call in the cavalry. So we have a few different ways that people are screened when they're in jail. So that's another way that you can be quote unquote tagged, is if you go through kind of jail, you may end up in ADAPT, you may end up with NIPA, you may end up in we have all these different organizations that do mental health. But you brought up another point that makes complete sense. Because sadly enough, I feel like so much of what we do is reactive instead of proactive, right? We spend so much time reacting, but by that time, it's like someone had to be sacrificed. So one of the pieces of legislation that I do want to introduce, you have a license to carry. So you know that you had to do a class and you had to learn about gun safety. And there was actually a process that you went through. I went through that same process. I'm waiting on mine to be sent to me, but I've been a gun owner. Going into the legislature, I thought I should probably do the responsible thing and get an actual license,
Right.
Instead of just owning a gun.
Right.
And so, but if we required everyone to have a license, not just if you want to carry, but everyone, if you're going to own a gun, you've got to actually have a license. Then if there are any things that say the trainer who is training you to get your license to carry, if he sees some things, then he can report those things, or he can kind of mark you. It's also a way of tracking somebody, right? Just like if you're speeding, even in Missouri, they're going to look at your Texas license and it's going to be tagged. So it's a tagging mechanism for us as well, because when people get arrested, say on a domestic violence case here in Texas, then they sign a piece of paper and say, oh, I promise that I'm not going to own a gun or possess my gun right now while this case is pending. But we don't even know if they really have guns,
Okay.
right? But if you're tagged, then that way we will know. And so it at least provides for some sort of screening. And the reality is that if we're going to say that you have to have a driver's license to operate a vehicle, then why is it that we don't require everyone to have a license to operate something that truly is a deadly weapon? So I think
like it's too much like right? Sometimes things are just too much like right. It makes too much sense. So that's
well, I'm going with common sense, kind of basic, especially since it won't necessarily cost us very much money, because we already have the infrastructure. Obviously, we're already handing out these licenses, but right now we're going into a tough budget year. So
Right.
it actually may generate some revenue as well, right? Without actually instituting the tax. So, I call this my Beyonce year in Austin. I plan to make lemonade out of the lemons that we've been given with COVID-19, and really get some smart legislation passed, whether it's with healthcare, whether it's with guns, by being able to make these kind of good arguments about, well, you guys want more money because we're low on money. This is a way to get money. And then so we'll be able to know that at least people are getting trained on how to use these guns and things like that. When it comes to the police situation and guns, I could talk forever. So I'm not even going to go there with like the legislation that I'm planning to propose. But I think Tanya is doing an amazing job in the city of Dallas, and we've just got to continue to get the word out as relates to access, and making sure that people know what their opportunities are, what's available to them in general, whether it's to make sure that they're making these reports to police oversight, or if it's a matter of making sure that they know where they can take a loved one if there's a mental illness concern. As the Congresswoman has pointed out, we were already dealing with a high incidence of mental illness, and a lot of it, like you've already talked about, has gone undiagnosed. Well, we know for a fact that in the midst of the pandemic, suicide is up. We know that even when it comes to officers, they have a higher incidence of suicide as well. And so I have some reforms that I'm thinking about as relates to officers, because we always anticipate that if somebody goes off to an international war, that when they come back, we've got to check their mind. But we have officers that are literally fighting a domestic war every single day, and they're seeing things that the normal mind should never, ever get used to seeing. Yet we don't do a check on them. We check them when they come in, and we check them if they shoot somebody, once again, on the reactive side, instead of kind of randomly checking in on them, seeing how they're doing. And they still deal with the normal stressors of life, right? Like they go through divorces, they go through other things, and it's safer for them as well as the community if we are really making sure that we are checking in on them, because they are walking around with a deadly weapon on their hip.
Representative Cocker, you're making too much sense. Why are you with the president? We should be seeing her on the town hall meeting tonight, right? No, you guys have given. I'm going to tell you why these town hall meetings and why this is important. Because you all are giving facts. I think that we live in a country right now where we're getting so much misinformation. There's so much confusion. We don't really know what's what. We've talked about domestic violence where it relates to gun violence. We've talked about mental health where it relates to gun violence. I am going to go off script just a little bit, and whoever wants to jump in quickly, because we're limited on time, and answer a quick question. Where do people go to get this information? I am an advocate for mental health. I tell people all the time on my social media, on the radio, that I go to therapy, I go to counseling. Just on a daily, I think it's important, right? And again, trying to make it less taboo-ish, as Ms. Johnson mentioned earlier. But I have people in my DMs all the time asking me the question, well, where do I go to seek that help? You know, we do, I hosted a board for Children's Health, and a woman from the Halliburton Foundation mentioned her son committed suicide. She said, people don't commit suicide because they don't want to live. People commit suicide because they've run out of coping mechanisms. They no longer have those. And I remember going home to my mom. Both of my parents had their master's degrees. You know, I grew up in a pretty nice environment, a decent environment. And I was like, even y'all didn't teach me coping mechanisms. That's one thing that we never discuss, are those coping mechanisms and running out. So if there are people that are watching today that are dealing with, again, it's the label of the mental health. Maybe they're just feeling angry, maybe feeling hopeless. Those things that we are told every single day, you just got to get up and keep moving. You got to get up and keep pushing. That's my first question. Where do people go to get that information? It's almost like all of this information is spread out everywhere. Like, is there a source that we can, as a slight takeaway right now, that we can lead our viewers to get this information on how to cope? Does anybody know if there is somewhere?
Well,
I was gonna say.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that they can go online and just search Metro Care Services. And so metrocareservices.org, they can always give them a call. They can direct them to providers that can help. So I would just recommend Metro Care Services.
Okay, perfect. Also, I believe it was you, Mr. Veazey, that brought up earlier, helping us to police each other and domestic violence. We don't want to talk about it. We want to mind our own business. There is a fear involved. We have a culture, a no snitch culture. I think that, you know, probably back before my time, as Jasmine brought up, we did in our own communities, we were able to police one another. But that was way back in the day. Now it's completely opposite. You better not say anything. So that's why I appreciated you, Officer Schultz, for bringing up the fact that people can anonymously report things if they see things in their community. But let's talk about that just really, really quick. Again, we're about to run out of time. What do you say to those people that are fearful of getting involved, maybe fearful of retaliation, and really afraid to call because they don't feel safe when the police show up to their homes? If anybody wants to take that question.
Well, I'm not sure I have the answer, but what I can say is we now are beginning to talk more about mental health and common problems that we've taken not to even involve emotional disturbances. Mm-hmm. They've been considered kind of normal until something happens.
Yes.
So I think to open this community health center in Southwest Dallas, I think it's going to be somewhere near the old Redbird Shopping Center, is going to be of great help. We've had facilities, but we have not had the parents to seek out help until there's a crisis. And we've not had the public education geared in that direction where they can feel safe and not feel crazy themselves by seeking the help. I think positions like Tanya has can help with that. I think the police department is more equipped than they used to be and been given all the responsibility without the means to approach it. All of these working together. And I think that the study that's going on now, where this Officer Rucker is working with all of these caring and emergency type departments, fire, police, Parkland, and the mental health, all coming together, is going to give us a better outlet of where people can go, and even to realize what mental health and emotional health really is.
Yes.
It is not normal, whatever we consider normal. and it can't have some help. We can't just assume that they're crazy or they're off and nothing we can do about it. You can drive down the street anywhere in Dallas, in our neighborhoods, and see people obviously mentally ill on the streets, but nobody pays it any attention. Nobody says anything until the trouble comes. We, as a general citizenry, has got to be more in tune with seeking help before a tragedy happens.
That's
Lady, can I say this quickly?
absolutely.
I will never forget it. You know, this was because I'm getting older now, so this was almost 30 years ago. A friend of mine had come home from college, and we were all at their house, and a woman showed up that I'd never seen before, and the mom said, "We all have to leave the house because she needs to talk to this lady." And when we were leaving and going out to our cars, I was saying, "Hey, what's going on? Why did your mom put us out?" And she said that woman is married to a police officer in one of the mid cities. I don't remember which one it was. It was Hearst, Euless, or Bedford. She's married to a police officer, and whenever he beats her up, they come over and just walk down the street with him and talk to him and tell him to cool off. They won't arrest him. And I think now victims need to understand that, you know, it's not like it was 30 years ago. You know, if you call now, they're going to file charges. They're going to look into these charges, and hopefully when they're accurate, someone will be prosecuted. And I think that's the biggest difference that's changed when the police used to say, you know, "Hey, y'all are fine now? You cooled off, everything's good." That it's not like that anymore. People need to know now that people will listen to you, and people will take your concerns seriously. There are shelters that can protect you and your children, and I think that we need to reiterate that as much as we often can.
Right, because people definitely want to be heard. I still have to mention the fear that's involved, even for a woman that may be a victim of domestic violence. You may want that man to get help. You may want him to even possibly be punished, but you don't want him to be killed. And that a lot of times in our community is the fear of, I'd rather just take it and not call because this could really escalate to something that I did not intend for it to. Which leads me to a question. We actually have a question that came in from Facebook from an officer. And he said, as an officer, how can we make our encounter with us as comfortable as we can, even in situations where we have to take enforcement action? Said, I try to explain what's going on as clear and professional as possible without jeopardizing civilian and officer safety. And I think to Ms. McClary, I know that they are trying to bridge that gap. We're all trying to bridge that gap. I don't know that answer. Can anybody make any recommendations? Because that is a tough task for police officers.
The police academies should address that in the curriculum.
That's good.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go. Look,
So I'm a
in there for 14 years, Representative Johnson. You see how clear and cut that was? That wasn't rocket science.
I'm gonna also add to that though. One of the things that you know, when we talk about, and I know Tanya is working on these types of things, you know, there is a perception of law enforcement right now that no matter who you are, you have to get over that, right? Like it's, you walk in and it's already a negative situation, no matter like how nice you may be, like you may be the best police officer, right? But with everything that's going on social media and things like that. So I often talk to people about the fact that when I was a little girl, DARE was in my school. And so sometimes if the community only sees a police officer when it's time to take somebody to jail or it's time to do something in a negative capacity, then every time they come, people have their guards up and they're always going to believe that this is a bad situation, right? But if officers are just around, even when there's not a problem, and they're communicating with those in the areas that they patrol, I think it goes a long way as far as building a rapport with the community that you police. And that way, even if that person is unfamiliar with you, hopefully somebody else who's there is like, no, 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 that's Officer such and such. You're good to go. Like, he's not going to do anything wrong to you. I think that that could help as well.
I agree with you very, very much. That is called community policing. It
Yes.
works. We just have to fund it.
That's
Yep.
And I agree, because people don't realize that, you know, one of the things, Deputy Chief, that I'm concerned about with the department is that people can't file anonymous complaints. I think that's a problem. Our office is going to be looking into that, because depending on where you sit, some people have a real fear of retaliation, and it's based in reality. And so I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned that somebody has to give a name or some identifying information to file a complaint. And I think that's part of the state law. So I'm looking at my legislators right now on this call to look into that, because I don't
Jasmine,
feel
you're being
that,
called on.
I think people should be able to file an anonymous complaint. And so, because it's real, I mean, I watch, like I said, every week we go over the complaints, and I just watch sometimes how the officers just approach the situation. And you know, if sometimes it's just, we're already on 10. I'm like, how do we go from 0 to 10? I'm like, can we just, you know, and so things are being escalated, and people do have a distrust. I mean, as soon as something happens, the neighbor next door wants to come out with their camera and film it and stuff. And I agree. I think we've gotten away from officers that are on patrol and stuff just knowing their neighbors. I mean, one of the things I talked to the police department about is that I know some things are not in policy. Like, a policy does not say that before I tow this person's car, they should knock on the door and say something. But wouldn't that go a long way? Wouldn't that go a long way to knock on my door and say, hey, Ms. McClary, your car looks abandoned. If you don't move it in the next 24 hours, I'm going to ticket you. Now, does the policy say they have to do that? Of course not. But it goes to put community policing, giving people warnings, or, you know, I'm not talking about violent crime, but I'm talking about just everyday things in terms of building rapport and doing other things. Like, I've seen a lot of situations where people are complaining where it just probably didn't have to go that way. If there was more communication, people understood why you were trying to put them in handcuffs. People understood what they were. I mean, I've seen people say, why am I being arrested? We don't have to tell you that. Just turn around and put your hands behind your back. I'm like, how are you going to just, I mean, think how you would feel if somebody just drove up to you, asked you to get out your car, and just told you to turn around and put your hands behind your back. So there's just a lot, I think, that, you know, I think the police are on heightened awareness, and I understand that it's a very tough job. It's a dangerous job, but also is the community. And I just think somehow we're just not having good communication with each other. And we really need to talk more about that. More communication skills, de-escalation skills, I think would help go a long way in many communities.
I agree.
I mean,
Everybody,
yeah,
oh, go ahead.
I want to totally agree with that, because communication is essential. We look at probably most of us our age. I'm a huge communicator. I probably overtalk, you know, compared to some people. And so I think it's really because you can communicate with somebody and they might not like the result, but if you're communicating it, they believe they're being treated with fairness. And I think that's an important aspect, as Ms. McClary was saying, is that, like, you know, if I have to arrest you, I can communicate the steps to that. And again, at the end of the day, you might not want to be arrested, but if you understand that process is in place and I treat you with respect and dignity, like I said, it might not be favorable, but at least there's that communication, that mutual respect for each other. And I think communication is essential. And I think with this new generation, sometimes we lose that communication piece, and probably someone my age doesn't understand how to communicate with somebody that's 20. And I think we need to learn what those communication pieces are so we can move forward as a community, as a police department, because essentially we're whole. We can't reduce crime by the Dallas Police Department or citizens of Dallas. It is a group effort, and we have to do it together. And if we can't communicate that end goal, we're going to be here just talking and talking. And at some point we have to go beyond that communication piece and actually put things into application.
Very, very great point. You're right. Respect, communication, and grace goes a long way.
Absolutely.
And it is a partnership. I'm going to ask, we have just a couple more questions, and then I want everybody to be thinking about a takeaway. You know, if we could share one thing that we want everybody to take away from this, whether it's information, whether it's a need, a possible solution. I never want us to have these discussions without offering up a possible solution, what we can do, next steps. I do want to ask, and this may be Officer Schultz or Congressman Veazey. We were talking earlier about the gun violence. We were speaking earlier about domestic violence. And I guess my question really is, we were talking about, doing mental health screenings and the things that we can make it more difficult to buy a gun. Is more crime committed by legally purchased guns or guns off of the street?
So, sir, do you want to go ahead, Veazey, Mr. Veazey?
No, go right ahead. Because you, I'm sure you know the statistics better than I do, but I know them. Go ahead.
So unfortunately, the statistics, I don't have solid numbers in front of me, but when we come across individuals that have guns, we often ask them, how they obtain that firearm and stuff. And there are times that you'd see that, hey, this is a Facebook purchase. Oh, it was actually taken in a burglary of a motor vehicle or a house. Some people actually had a girlfriend or somebody buy that for them too. And so people are using these other means to get these firearms. And sometimes they're purchasing legally because they don't have that background that would deter them from getting that. But there's always other means. And so, like I said, that's one of the things that we're trying to do is, like, I don't have raw data in front of me, but trying to figure out how people are getting these firearms and what they're doing. And like I said, a lot of times you'll see guns just, John has it and passed it over to Bob, and then Bob passed it over to Ted. And so they're not getting it by legal means. I mean, it's just like, oh, hey, I need a gun for this day, and then and this and this. So like I said, without having that raw data, I don't know that people are purchasing it legally. I mean, that's just opinion based on what I read and some of the things that we do when we interview individuals with guns. Mr. Veazey, you probably have something a little bit more maybe concrete from what you're seeing on your end with some of the legislation you're trying to pass.
Yeah, no, absolutely. According to the Justice Department, only about 10% of guns used in these crimes are legally purchased. And I want to reiterate, I say only 10% out of the total number of guns purchased each year is obviously a high number. And when you think about the gun crimes committed every year, again, 10% is a high number. So I don't want to diminish the 10% number, but it's only about 10%. Most of these guns are legally obtained. Many are in car burglaries, home burglaries. I was surprised that in my neighborhood a few years ago, next door, someone that was getting ready to go hunting the next morning, that they actually put their guns in the car the night before. I guess they didn't want to pack their, because you only go hunting, you got to get up before the sun. You got to get in your deer blind or your duck blind, whatever that may happens to be, before the sun rises. And so I guess they didn't want to deal with that, and their guns got stolen. I mean, I don't know why people do that, but I do think that we should have a database of stolen guns, and that's been an area of contention between some of the right-leaning Second Amendment guys. They think that it ought to be your right to report your gun stolen and that you shouldn't have to call the police. I think that there should be a database of these stolen weapons just so we know. I'll never forget when I was substitute teaching at a school right when I graduated from college, and there was a young man that was upset that another guy was picking on him at the school, and he brought a gun to the school. And luckily, there was a young lady that saw him, and she told the police, the teacher, and the detention, and the police officer, and the campus monitor. They came and got the gun out of the class, but they asked him where he got the gun. He said he bought it from a drug addict for $10. It was a 9mm gun. We need to have a database of these guns and where people are obtaining them, and figure out where they were stolen, to see if there are any sort of trends that would help the police department. And I think that will go a long way in keeping a lot of these illegal weapons off the street.
For all of our representatives and everybody else on this call today, it takes all of us. I cannot thank you enough for taking your time this evening. This is obviously a conversation that will continue, a conversation that we could literally be here till about 10 o'clock and just kind of scratch the surface. There's so much to be said and so much to be done. But personally, just as a person that I love my community, a part of my community, I want to thank each and every one of you for the work that you do day in and day out, because we need all of you. We need all of us. And it does take a village. You know, we always think about just taking a village when it comes to raising kids. It takes a village to maintain our community and bring the integrity back to our city, right? So I just want to thank you all. So I'm going to allow you guys to do your takeaways. What are your next steps? We're going to limit them to like 30 seconds to a minute, you know? So about 30 seconds to a minute, and I'll actually start with Congresswoman Johnson.
Well, thank you very much. Let me say, really, I appreciate this very much and all the participants. I have introduced legislation that's called the National Gun Violence Research Act. I don't think we have researched the issue enough. And that sounds maybe that is not important. But until we really do sound research and determine what the real issues are and how they can be addressed, we're just shooting. And we are hoping we'll hit where we're supposed to hit. But we've got to move with some precision and understanding.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Congressman Veazey?
Yes, I really hope that local police departments, and not just here in North Texas, but all around the state and country, will really look at measures similar to Operation Ceasefire that we see in Oakland and that we have seen in Boston, to where you identify these young men that you know are more likely to be involved in some of these violent crimes that include a firearm, and start working with them before they commit the crime and before they get a record and before they have to get into the system, which is going to make it harder for them to, fit into society. Let's start looking for programs to work, with them beforehand, instead of the police having the sort of, gung-ho mentality of, we're here to fight crime. We're here to prevent crime. And I think that will go a long way.
Good point. Thank you so much. Deputy Chief Schultz?
I couldn't say it better than Mr. Veazey. We need to work on programs that are addressing our young youth. I mean, they're the ones that are exposed to violence. So those are the ones that can become immune to it, and then they become, perpetuating in the cycle. And so we need to find programs that address those young juveniles, because those guys are our tomorrow.
Absolutely. State Representative Crockett?
Okay, I'm gonna say go vote.
Amen.
I mean, the reality is this. You've heard from two of the congresspersons that we have in DC, and they've both said one of the things that people just don't get is that they can push and write as much good legislation as they want to, but until we get them some help on the other side or in the White House, it's problematic, and we can't get these policies passed. And so I just want to encourage everyone to not only go vote, but educate somebody. This was a great opportunity for you to learn something, but guess what? Some of your friends didn't see it. So remind them to go on Facebook and learn, and encourage them to make sure they vote down ballot, especially in the state of Texas, because they got rid of straight party ticket voting. So my answer is make sure you're educated and make sure you vote.
Mrs. McCleary?
I would say contact our office. We want to hear from you. We were purposely put in place to be your voice to the police department. So take this number down, and I'm sure we will get it out. But 214-671-8283. 214-671-8283. And for those of you that want to use the internet, it's pretty easy. It's just the initials of our office, OCPO@DallasCityHall.com. OCPO@DallasCityHall.com. And we really want to hear from you, not only when you have complaints. If you see officers doing some good stuff, we want to reward those officers that are doing positive things in the community. And also, if you just have ideas about how you'd like to see the police reacting in your community. So please contact us. Complaints, commendations, and ideas.
I love that. And to remind you about earlier, the number that Representative Johnson told us about was 988. Remember that 988 if you're having some mental health issues and need extra help. And also that Dallas iWatch app, if you have any information that you'd like to report anonymously, Dallas iWatch. And thank you all for sharing that information. I'm going to say thank you again. And most importantly, I want to thank you because you made it understandable. I think that a lot of times when we get on and we have these discussions, it can go over our head. I always tell people, if I can understand it, I know everybody else understood it too. So thank you all for taking the time to really explain and educate and break it down and give us the facts. Again, there's so much confusion in this world. There's so much misinformation that I think sometimes we don't know if we're coming or going. But tonight, I have a little bit more peace knowing and understanding what possible steps we can make next. And again, everybody be in prayer about, we need these bills to pass through the Senate, okay? It's gonna take a little bit of prayer and power to get those passed. So keep doing what you're doing, and thank you all so much. To my sorors, thank you so much for allowing me to host today. I wanna bring back on Tracy, that's gonna close us out for the evening. Again, this is just one of 3 discussions, so you all stay tuned to what we have coming up. We have a lot of good stuff coming up.
A lot of good stuff coming up. Thank you again, Lady J. This was a great panel, a great discussion, lots going on. Even in our Facebook feed, there's lots of great discussion going on there. So everything I think has been said. We do want to let everybody on Facebook know to tune in. Our next panel discussion, continuing on gun reform, will be coming up in January. And as Jasmine Crockett said, go vote. If you already voted, call at least 5 friends or family members and check on them. If they haven't been to the polls, get them to the polls. Texas had a great start on Tuesday and Wednesday, but we got to keep the momentum going all the way up until the end. Thank you, everybody, and good night.
Night.
Bye.
Bye.